Turn off. If you're there, can you please turn on the recording? Thanks. So, hello everyone. My name is Ashish Kashyap and I'm the web dev lead of GDSC IIIT Bhopal. And today marks the second day of web dev week that we are conducting. And today I would be teaching the basics of JavaScript and DOM manipulation to you all guys, right? So let's start with the agenda of today, like what all topics that I would be covering. The topics would be history of JavaScript and what JavaScript actually is. Then we'll move on to some basics like variables, what are some primitives in JavaScript, and next we'll look into what functions and scoping in JavaScript is, and then we will move on to some we'll have and see some examples related to objects and how to define arrays, and some of the examples and native methods present in arrays, and at last we'll cover the DOM section as well, right? So let's start. So let's first discuss the history of JavaScript. So why JavaScript started, right? So JavaScript was actually written by a guy named Brendan Eich in 1995. And it's a fun fact that he wrote JavaScript in just 1 week, the initial prototype of the language. And the initial name was named as Mocha. And like after that in 1997, as you can see, it got standardized, because in the initial days what used to happen that big companies like Internet Explorer, they kind of implemented JavaScript in their own ways, hence uh, they so there was a need to have a standard that should be maintained, hence ECMAScript was born. ECMAScript is basically, you know, the official name of the language, and it is being maintained by the standard organization named as TC39. And here you can see all the timeline of the development of language. It took nearly around 25 years for this language to come to this point, and these are some of the major changes that happened. Typically, the major changes that happened was, you know, in ES5 and ES6, where we saw the addition of strict mode and functional array methods in the language, and also arrow functions, let const, and much more, right? So yeah, and also the name JavaScript was given just to attract the plethora and majority of the Java developers out there in 1995, and there is no assets relationship between JavaScript and Java, right? So please remember that. Next is what actually JavaScript is, right? So people usually define JavaScript as an high-level, single-threaded, garbage-collected, interpreted, prototype-based, multi-paradigm dynamic language with a non-blocking event loop, right? Pretty tough language out there, but it basically means that you have a high language. So I'm sure you guys must know what high language means. You don't have to work with machines bare metal hardware. You don't have to think about allocating and deallocating your memory resources, right? All of those are being done by the implementation of your compilers and parsers and all those things. And this is second term here, single threaded. This just means that like for examples, we have for example, in our computer we have multiple threads, right? And that threads helps us to do parallel processing, right? But in JavaScript it uses single thread only, and with that it has some performance optimizations, and it does all those things using a single thread only, right? And garbage collected basically means that you don't need to keep track of allocating and deallocating your memory resources. Like for example, you guys might have studied in your first semester the language C, and in that you have to, you know, take care of allocating the memory for your pointers and variables and deallocating them when you are not needing. So all of these things and optimizations in JavaScript are being done by the compiler itself, and you don't have to worry all about those things. And there is one major issue in JavaScript, that your web app or the website that you are building may have some sort of memory leaks. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay. And next we have interpreted, or known as just in time. And it just means that the source code is converted to bytecode and it is executed at runtime, right? So and this is why it's also known as a scripting language. And initially it was an interpreted language, but with the implementation of some of the JavaScript engines like V8 and SpiderMonkey. I'm sure you might have heard about V8. It was developed by Chrome. It's a JavaScript runtime, and SpiderMonkey is what Mozilla developed, right? So they use various techniques like just-in-time compilation for better performance and optimizations, right? And multi-paradigm basically means like it's general purpose and flexible. We can use both functional and imperative programming styles in JavaScript. And dynamic language term basically means that that its type system is pretty weak. And like for example, in languages like C++ and Java, you while defining your variables, you what do? You define its variable type as well, right? Like int variable name, right? String variable name. But in JavaScript, what happens is the true types of your variables are not known until the runtime, right? So that's all about this definition. And next, I got hold of this pretty good illustration that I found in the internet about how JavaScript differs from Python. So in Python, if we have like, for example, if we want to display like two strings after 1 second and print hello. So and we have appended time.sleep line here. Then what it does is it sleeps for 1 second, like for example, it blocks all the currently running threads for 1 second, and after that it executes it line by line, right? Whereas in whereas in JavaScript, what happens is all the synchronous lines of your code get executed first, that is here hello, and all the asynchronous tasks like set timeout, all of these get what I could say passed to the event loop, and there it gets executed, right? So this was a pretty good illustration that I found, and hence I thought of including here. So next we have the question of why only JavaScript, why not other languages? So you might have an idea about what HTML and CSS is. HTML basically defines the the basic structure of our website. CSS basically defines the styling of our website, and JavaScript is the what I could say the main. It's pretty obvious, right? Main working and the behavior of an application is defined by JavaScript, right? So next we have, yeah, that is a pretty Atwood's law is a pretty good law that I found out. And it basically says that any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. What that means is, like, if you have like a JavaScript, if a particular technology or a field, we can develop some applications or web apps using JavaScript, then definitely there is 99% chance that it may happen, right? So for example, we have now backend Node.js servers which are written using JavaScript. We have mobile applications developed using React Native and Ionic frameworks, and we also have desktop apps like VS Code and WhatsApp desktop, for those who don't know, is built on Electron framework only, right? So yeah, that's a pretty good code that I found. So I thought of including that. And yeah, so Douglas Crockford said that it's the only language that people think that they don't need to learn before they start using it. And I kind of feel relatable to this quote as well, because when I first started learning, I thought JavaScript is basically uh, the C out of C++ replaced with console.log. And I thought I never, understood the basics really well initially. And that's like when I actually found out bugs and my website wasn't behaving the way I wanted it to be. That's when I, dived deeper and thought of learning it from the start and clearly, right? Developing good mental models. So now arises the question about how to run your JavaScript code, right? So there are basically two ways. The first way is that you can include the script tag in your HTML file and connect the index, the JavaScript file to your HTML file, right? And the second way is from command line. And please note that here I have included the script tag in the head section as well. And do note that here I have written differ. Differ keyword basically instructs the HTML parser to load the index.js file after it has passed the body of the HTML file, right? If I wouldn't have used this differ keyword, then basically what would have happened is that, for example, if in my index.js file, if I am accessing a particular DOM element or body element like h1 or h2 or a heading tag which isn't actually passed or it's present in the DOM, then it would get throw out an error, right? So just to prevent that and load the index.js file after the parsing of the main HTML file has been done, the differ keyword is used. And if you don't want to use this differ keyword, basically it's recommended to use the script tag just before the closing of the body, right? And the next way is from command line. I'll just briefly show you. And for those who don't know Node.js, so Node.js, through Node.js, you can run your JavaScript files. And to install Node.js, you can just Google it. Yes. So here you can just go and install the Node.js version depending upon your operating system, and I would recommend you to go with the LTS version. It doesn't the LTS version basically means it's long time supported and it doesn't get depreciated really quick. And yeah, and the main reason that I showed you to download this, because in the next session, that is tomorrow, Prashant would be teaching you Node.js and Express. So if you want to follow along with him, you must download this as a prerequisite, right? And yeah, and to run your app like index.js file, what you could do is after it gets installed in your terminal, you could, for example, if I have an example.js file over here, and for example, if I need to run this example.js file, what I could say is I could just write node, and with that, the name of the file that I want to run, and my file would get run successfully, right? So yeah, that's how I wanted to share how to connect. And yeah, I forgot to show you how to connect a JavaScript file, right? So here we can, if you want, you can add the javascript.js file that you want to connect, right? So let me just close this. So next we have primitives. So primitives are the fundamental building blocks of the language, and these primitives are immutable, just like any other language, like C++ and Java. We have some of the common ones like string, number, boolean, and basically you need to like, and big int is usually used for representing big integers, and undefined is basically a variable that has not been assigned a value, right? And it's like whenever a method or a statement returns undefined when it doesn't have an assigned value, right? And whereas null actually means that sorry, it got linked. Yeah, null actually means that the user has explicitly said that this value doesn't exist in a particular variable, right? And symbol is a built-in object whose constructor returns a symbol primitive, right? And it isn't used much frequently, so don't worry about it. And Boolean is just true and false. You guys might know this, so I'm just walking through this. Next, we have variables. So variables in JavaScript are usually declared using three keywords, which are let, const, and var. So var is usually not recommended in the initial versions of the language. Var was used, but many of the people like instruct you to not use var because of the function scoping it has. Whereas let and const have introduced block level scoping, and like in various parts of your code you won't encounter ambiguity and bugs due to the usage of your let and const keywords, whereas var sometimes behaves weirdly, so it's not recommended to use this, right? And yeah, const is basically your variable that cannot be changed, but sometimes people say if it's a variable that cannot be changed, then why it is named a variable? Even I don't know the answer to this question. Like the good person to ask this is probably Brendan Ike, the founder. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share. And yeah, it's an industry practice to use let over was. And next we have operators. So in JavaScript, basically like any other language, we have some basic operators like plus, minus, division, multiplication, remainder operator, right? And all the conditional and like any other language, we have like if we uh, use a plus sign between two strings, we JavaScript actually concatenates those two strings, and hence the result here, as you can see, we have hello string and we have world string, and it concatenates it. And in JavaScript, we also have the problem of type conversion and coercion that we'll discuss in the next slide. And here, as you can see, we have 3 plus 4 plus 5. So 3 when added to 4, so JavaScript coerces 4 to a string and it becomes 34. And then the string 34 when added to 5 becomes 345. And here, since the evaluation is started from left to right, we initially in the second example, we have, where's my mic? Yeah. Uh, Initially we have 3 plus 4 as 7, and 7 plus 5 gets converted to 75, right? And like any other language, we have comparison operators, less than, equal to. These are pretty basic, so yeah, you won't get any difficulty understanding it. There is one caveat that in equality operator in JavaScript, it always tries to perform coercion. Coercion is basically, if I must say, it's a sort of typecasting where you change the variable's type. So here, for example, if I'm comparing the integer or number 123 to the string 123, it's giving me true. And if I'm like comparing, is anybody seeing anything? No. So if I'm comparing one to the, I'm comparing one to true, then also it's giving me true, because it's converting one to the Boolean true and string 123 to the number string, right? It happens something like that. In JavaScript spec, it is written that whenever you have a left hand side as a number and a right hand side as a string, the compiler should try to coerce that. So it was a pretty nifty thing that people sort of complained about, and in the future versions they introduced triple equality, which avoids that behavior, right? So it's an industry practice. Please use triple equals wherever possible. So that would help you and would prevent your web app from having sort of bugs, right? And also due to this features, like JavaScript doesn't have a great type system, right? So it's recommended like recently it's recommended to use TypeScript in your projects. It has a strongly typed system, and it's like recently in the Stack Overflow's survey, like Java TypeScript was among the most popular and favorite language of developers. So please keep an eye on that. It has a really great learning curve as well. It is a bit difficult, but once you get a hang of it, your your apps would be free from bugs. That's what majority of the developers say out there, right? So let's discuss functions and scope. So functions, I'm guessing many of the people would actually know what it is, but still, a function is a piece of code that can be called during the life cycle of the app to perform a task or a return a value, right? Basically, function, you pass the arguments, it returns something, and that function just sits in your code, and whenever you call that, it's available with the return value, right? So function declaration, this is the syntax, and this is the function call arguments, and the return value can be assigned to a variable. Pretty basic stuff. I'm sure you guys must know about this. If not, then you can see that. And next we have anonymous functions. So JavaScript also allows us to create anonymous functions, basically functions without names. And these functions can be passed as an arguments to other functions. So these are some of the things that I like about JavaScript, because many of the famous languages like Python, I'm not sure about Python, but C++, they don't allow such kind of behaviors. So it's pretty easy doing these sorts of things in JavaScript. And there's also one thing known as IIFE. IIFE is basically immediately invoked functions, immediately invoked expressions, right? Basically, uh, we append, like if I have a function body named name, basically they append curly braces, which means that after declaring a function named, we just executed right there itself, right? So that's what IIFE is. IIFE, for those wondering. uh, and next we have higher order functions as well. So higher order functions are basically functions as arguments, or we could kind of say that these are functions inside functions. Using higher order functions, we can return those functions inside a function, right? And pretty useful and popular example is set timeout and array.map, right? Here we could see that we have defined set timeout, and inside that we are console.logging after 2 seconds, right? So, and here we have defined a named function named log, and it's been passed inside the set timeout function, right? So next we have like when you should write functions, right? So we should typically try to write functions when we are finding that like majority, like we are using a same piece of code again and again. Then we should try to abstract that into a custom function, and we should try to follow the approach of DRY, that is don't repeat yourself. And it's a pretty good software practice, and you must do that, right? So we have built-ins, and just like any other language like C++, Python, JavaScript also has a plethora of uh, what you could say built-in methods and functions that you could use, like two lowercase and two uppercase. Just like in C++, we have two lowercase, two uppercase, mat.round, mat.ceil. These are pretty obvious like functions, and if you want to learn more about these functions, you can always follow the Mdn Docs. For those wondering what Mdn Docs is, Mdn stands for Mozilla Developer Networks, and Mdn Docs acts as a Bible for all the web developers out there. If you have any sort of thing that any particular uh, concept or anything that you want to reference, you can always Google about that thing, and you can append your search with Mdn, and most probably you will get that. And it's maintained by Mozilla, and it's a pretty good doc, so you must go through that. And next we go through objects. So JavaScript object is basically a collection of key value pairs. So for example, in C++, you might know about like maps, in STL libraries maps, and in Python we have dictionaries, right? So it's basically a collection of key value pairs, but the condition is that it's not necessary that that these key value pairs would be ordered, right? So yeah, that's pretty basic. And yeah, that's it. And this is the basic syntax. We have a property name which is key, and we have a value over here, right? So next we have, yeah, that's a pretty, common quote you might have seen or you will see when you will start making web apps or work with JavaScript, that everything except a JavaScript primitive is an object, right? If you console.log type of anything in your application other than a primitive, it will always give you an object, type of object. Like this happens a lot. So this was a meme that I found, and I thought of including this. So next we have we'll go through the creation of objects. So like these are the three basic methods. I guess someone is entering. So these are the three basic methods of creating an object in JavaScript. The first one is pretty obvious. Just if you are creating an empty object, just add these two curly braces. The second one is constructor based, where you, I would say, pre-paint the new keyword and say object, and inside that you add everything, the object that you want to create. And the third one is static method, where you use object.create, and inside that you define your object, right? And how to access and actually get add properties to the objects can be done through this syntax. It's pretty intuitive to see. For example, if you have an, for example, let me show you in Notepad. If you have object like dogs, right? Uh, it's an empty object initially, and if you want to add a property named color, right? Dog's color, right? So what you will do is you will write dogs.color equals to the color of the dog, right? It's red. And if you want to assign that object's color into something else, wait a minute, yeah, to something else, then you can say const color equals to dogs.color, right? Pretty obvious and intuitive. I don't think you will find difficulty in understanding this. And if you want to delete any properties of the object, you can just pre-paint the delete keyword, and the required properties would get deleted, right, by this syntax. Next we have references. So I'm sure you might know about this. Like for example, this happens in other languages as well. Like for example, if you have for example a variable named uh, value, right, and another variable named value 2, right? And if you assign value 2 to value, then what would happen is its copy would be passed on to the value, right? And value would be, sorry, value 2, let's take it 13, and let's not initialize it. And then what we would have, value would have the value 13, right? And value 2 would also have 13. uh, and if I change value 2 to something else, then value would always remain 13, right? Because a copy of that variable gets created. Whereas in objects, what happens is a reference gets passed. So it maintains a reference to the original, object that, and it doesn't has a full copy of it as it used to happen in the primitives, right? And Yeah, so that this is an example that you can see. We have an original object. We have assigned original to X and original to Y. And if we like check for triple equality, like I just told you, it checks for, the types and the values as well. So it is returning me true. And if I check for if X is equals to empty, then it's giving me false, because actually the reference gets passed and the object doesn't, right? And if we and here, as you can see, I have x dot hello equals to world, and if I make a change to original dot hello, and y dot hello would also get changed, right? So yeah, that's about references. And yeah, like when you would be actually making applications, you might need to combine objects frequently. So object dot assigns helps us to combine various objects. And uh, people usually don't use object dot assign very much, the industry practice or majority of the people. And the easy way to do the same is to use the spread syntax. Spread syntax basically, it's just like spreading butter on a like bread, I must say. And you just like, for example, if I have an object sorry, const obj1, and I have const obj2, and I have to create new obj from the two of them. What I could do is I could spread the obj1 and I could spread the obj2, right? So it's a pretty easier way to combine those two objects instead of the left one. Honestly speaking, I haven't used object dot assign till date in any of my projects or writing. So yeah, instead of like using something like object dot assign and passing those inside those parentheses, the right method of using spread syntax is pretty easy, and you must use that, right? So next we move on to arrays. So arrays are also nothing but uh, objects only, but they are a special type of objects, right? Basically it means that they store the ordered collection of data, right? Homogeneous elements, not no, no, I must not say homogeneous, because homogeneous is in other languages like C++, right? You can have non-homogeneous elements as well, and the basic condition is that the data should be ordered. And like you can access those elements and properties inside your array using indexing, right? Like this syntax. Where is my mouse pointer? Yes, through this, right? Indexing, like, and I don't think I need to say this, but indexing starts from 0 in majority of the programming languages. So yeah, that was it. And next we have some of the majorly used JS methods that you would encounter in your day-to-day writing of your JS code. There are some also some of the basic ones like shift and object like if you want to learn more about this, you could always reference the Mdn Docs array.prototype. You could search and you will get this. And these are some of the, like, this illustration I found out in the internet, and it was pretty good, and I thought of including here. So map basically just maps all the elements inside your array, and basically changes, or I must say, yeah, changes, and performs an operation on it and returns the same array to you, right? If, for example, for example, I'm multiplying every element of my array to 2, and uh, based on a certain condition, and the third object, for example this, doesn't satisfy that condition, then it would return me undefined, right? So this is a common behavior. You will when you will reference those methods, you will easily get this. And similarly, we have filter to filter some elements. Like here we have square boxes, and these are here we are getting three of them. The circled one isn't getting out in the output. We have find to find whether a particular type of object or variable is present, and we have find index of to find the index, fail to change this, from a particular index, like from here, from this one means that it gets starts filling from the first index, right? And some just basically checks whether some value is present in our array, and every just checks whether every value is present or not. Since we have a circle here, it returns us true, right? So yeah. Sorry. So next we'll go to the DOM section, document object model. So DOM is basically the way that JavaScript and HTML, CSS of our file interact with each other, and usually this is called DOM, or we could say document object model. DOM is basically a bunch of objects and methods that you can call from JavaScript to interact with the HTML and CSS of our page, right? So, and it basically has a document with a logical tree, and that tree consists of nodes and subnodes. And if you have experience working with object oriented language, uh, you might know about its like each node has its own methods and properties and accessors and things like that. So, and also those nodes have event handlers attached to them. So once an event is triggered, the event handlers in that node gets executed, right? And for those wondering what this meme is, this was a pretty great meme that I found, and I thought of including this. So this is Dom, by the way. Uh, Fast and Furious trivia. So next we'll move to event and listeners. So yeah, I think I'll try to cover this by coding. So so websites are meant to be reactive to users, right? So in order to be reactive, we need to wait for them to do stuff, right? If you want to display an alert when a particular button is clicked, or display the timers, or anything that we want to do based on certain activities of the user, we can use events and listeners, right? And we can respond to those by using something called as event listeners, right? And so event delegation is basically a bunch of elements that you need to listen. So just wait, I'll just cover this after I code. So yesterday, Kunal took the session of HTML and CSS, and he wrote HTML and CSS of the website that he was building. So today I have to complete the JavaScript part of that. So let's do some hands-on coding. Uh, let's close this notepad session. So I have an index.html file. I have a CSS file. What I need to do is create an script.js file, I must say. So let's just create this from here only, it's easier. Yes, and I have already written the script.src, script.js. I have already integrated this. So for example, if I want to check whether this in my JavaScript file is connected to the index.html file, I could just say something like, and using live server. By the way, I'm using live server extension in VS Code, which basically serves your HTML files in your browser, and it's a pretty good way if you don't want to just go and right click and open from the browser, right? So this is what Kunal wrote in yesterday's session, and there's a dev right there. That's uh, can you
आ
please
गया आ
mute
गया आ
your
गया मैं
screen?
अंदर आ गया आ गया आ गया
Oops. Yeah, so I'm console.logging the let me check whether it's connected. Yeah, so we are getting hello over here. So let's try to write like try to connect and write JavaScript for our website. And let me just remove this div that is getting rendered over here. uh, it's from, I don't know. We'll remove that later. So first we need to, I guess, uh, okay, there's a div at the bottom, I guess, that I haven't removed. Yeah, it's here. Sorry for that. And yeah, I need to write the JavaScript for this, right? So basically, our motto is uh, we have a form where we are entering the name of our students. We have their email IDs, their branch names, and something to tell them about themselves. And when we are clicking on submit, the page gets reloaded, right? And you might be thinking that why the page got reloaded, because it's the default behavior that whenever you click on submit button that's defined inside a like form, the default behavior is to reload the page and submit those things, right? So first, I guess we need to let's create an array. So what we are going to do is we'll take all the users data and we'll store it in local storage, right? And for those wondering what local storage is basically a small storage kind of place where user browser stores whatever the user has, and it gets persisted between different sessions and you know different sessions and your tab activities. And whereas we have something known as session storage as well, which gets removed as soon as, or removed, or I should say purged, when as soon as you close the tab, right? So we'll just create an object named sorry object and sorry not object but an users array. So let's create that. And next we'll try to add the users to our file, right? And for that, let's define an event listener into that. For those wondering what event listener is, event listeners are basically, let me just show them by example. Like first I should mm, like let me first show you what query selectors and all of those things are. So for example, like for example, if I want to change the color of this submit button, what I could do is I could write submit button, define a variable for that, and I could write document dot query selectors. Query selector is basically type of methods that using which we can select or access various properties and DOM nodes in our HTML document. And here we have a submit button and its class is form box, right? So I will write dot form box here, if we would if instead of form box I would have defined something like id equals to btn, then I could have used something like this as well, like this, sorry, btn, right? So what we do, it's form box, right? So form box, we grab that element and then we need to change its color, right? So red, sorry, submit button dot style dot background color dot, we need to change its background, hence I'll write background color equals to for example green. Let's see what happens. Oh, I actually selected a different like element, so it's better to select that using id. So what I'll do is I'll actually select that by using an id only. So as you can see, we got the submit buttons color to green. And next, so basically what we did is we called a method on DOM, right? We called a method on DOM and sorry, document. And document is a globally available variable in the browser that we can use to interact with the HTML and CSS, right? And it has a lot of methods that we can use. And in this case, we are using query selector, in which we can pass a CSS selector and it returns us the first one of the matching selectors, right? And if we have many of those on the page, we usually get the first one, right? And from them, from that, what we have done is that we have gotten that tag and we have manipulated the style using submit button dot style dot background color, right? So that's the example that I wanted to show. And next, I also wanted to show you about event listeners, right? I told you in my slide. So, and event listeners, for example, let's take an example. So I want to, for example, if I want to display a message or an alert message whenever user submits the message, like for example, successfully submitted your form, right? So we could do something like const, we need to grab the button, right? So const button equals to document dot query selector, and the button had the id of btn, right? If I'm not wrong, yeah, it has btn. So I have grabbed the button element, and on that button element I can add an event listener. Event listener listens on the document for any of the change or events happening, and whenever that event happens, like for example, we here we are listening for a click event, and whenever that click event happens, we will run a callback function named anonymous function named uh, here, right? And we'll alert the user by saying that successfully submitted your form, right? So let's check whether we are getting that alert message or not. My branch is CSC. Hello there, and submit. Oh, so you can see we got the alert message here. So yeah, that was it. And also I wanted to share you share something about event delegation. So event delegation is basically like if you have a bunch of elements that you need to listen for events on, uh, you could try to attach an event listener to each, but that's a bit tedious to do, right? So instead, what we do is we attach an event listener to its parent, right? And in JavaScript, what happens is there's a thing known as event bubbling. So when an event fires on an element or a child element, the event gets bubbled up to its parent, and then its parent and its parent to its parent until all the root elements get bubbled up, right? So let me just show you by an example. So for example, if I would have like for example number of buttons here, right? One and let me just copy a bunch of them and let me just rename them. Right. These are some of the buttons, and I'm enclosing all of these buttons inside a div dot button container, right? I have enclosed in all of the buttons inside this. Let me see if I'm able to see. Yeah, you can see all the buttons here. So if I want to fire an event that my button number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 got clicked, then I might need to, attach an event listener to all of single of them. And while like in practically, while attaching an event listener to each of one of them would be a bit tedious to do. So what we can do is we can use the concept of event delegation. So what we can do here is like query using document.query selector. What you can do is, let me just write that query selector, and its last name is button container, right? Button container dot add event listener. We are adding an event listener here, and whenever someone clicks on that button, we'll have a callback function, and that callback function would be passed an event, right? Every event triggers a function, callback function, and that passes the event, which has all the attributes like target and which event was clicked and all, right? So inside that, I'll define like alert, and sorry, you click on button number, and here I could use something known as template strings, uh, template literal, sorry, where you could you know use JavaScript variables inside strings, right? So in so here I could write something like this, and I could write function named event dot target dot inner text. Inner text is basically our event has the all the information about its parent and its child, and the inside text and the value that it's triggering. So yeah, so I guess this should work. Fingers crossed. Let's try to do this. Yeah, as you can see, we are getting, you clicked on button number 1, and if I'm clicking button number 3, I'm getting button number 3, right? So yeah, that's the basic example that I wanted to show you all. And let's just remove all of this. So examples are done. All I need to do is complete the thing that was left in yesterday's session. So what I'll do is, yeah, so I was actually creating an array named users. So let's define an array named users. It's initially empty, and then we'll actually add an event listener as well. So let's add an event listener on our document. Add event listener. There's something known as DOM event loaded, DOM content loaded, sorry, that listens when the DOM of our website gets loaded, and it gets executed, or its callback function, I must say, gets executed when the DOM gets fully loaded, right? So this is used just to prevent bugs. So yeah, inside the callback function, I'll have an event listener, document dot get element by ID, and it's button, right? I'm sure it's button. Yeah, it's button, sorry, btn, and dot add event listener, and I'm adding an event listener of type click, and let's name the function that we will use to add our object and our array named add users, right? So this is the event listener that I have defined. So let's start with creating the add users object, add users, like defining add users function. So let's define it here. And this function would be passed an argument named event. Let's not use event. That would be pretty long variable name to use again and again. And here I would write something known as prevent default. Prevent default is basically used to stop the form from submitting and reloading your page. It's the default behavior, and using, submitting your forms and these kind of things, you use e.prevent default, right? And next I would like to select the form elements, right, inside my form. So let's see what class name he has given. We have something. We have a branch, right? And yeah, so we have branch, we have about, we have form box, we have name, we have email, right? So the only thing for which I need to check is radio buttons, right? So let's grab the radio button value. So let radio button value, sorry, it's a really bad name. We could use something known as branch name equals to uh, sorry, let's name something like radio button only. And let's do something like document dot get element by id. Since there are a bunch of radio buttons, we'll use something known as get elements by id. And we had a class name of uh, branch, right? Let's console.log whether this is working or not, whether I have successfully grabbed those. Add users, let me just call add users here. Type error e is undefined, right? Oh, so let's just write the whole code and then we'll try to debug that. So console.log radio button, I have gotten that. Let's remove this from here. And if my radio button, it's an array that's been written, right? So if the first index or the first radio button is been checked, then I'm sure that my branch name would be, let's define a variable name branch, branch name, right? And branch name would be, since the first one is CSC, right? Yeah, it's CSC. So branch name would be assigned CSC. Similarly for others, we can do something like this. ECE, right? And next we need to define our data object. So we could define it something like this. So let data object equals to, for example, we need to have a unique ID of our, data. So we'll use something known as ID property, and we'll use date.now. And next we have name. Name would be document dot get element by ID, and then it was named a name, right? Yeah, we have label named a name, right? So name, and we'll grab its value, and we have email as well. Document dot get element by ID, and we have email We'll grab its value as well. And next we have branch. For that we have branch name already. And what else is remaining? We have text area, right? Text area named about, right? So we'll do something about this. Document dot get element by id about value. So this is the data object that I have created. Now all I need to do is just push the data object to my local storage. Firstly to the users array that I have created, and then I will push that users array to the local storage, right? So users dot push, I'm pushing the users object to my users array, and then like I'll just console.log that as well. So.log, so that we can see we have created the uh, data successfully. And next what we can do is we can use something known as local storage dot get set item. And firstly we need to pass what is known as my let's name our list something as my user list. And here we need to write something known as JSON.stringify. The reason why I'm writing JSON.stringify, because in majority of the database system, uh, our data doesn't get stored as we see, right? It gets converted into stream of bytes and it gets stored in that way, right? So we need to convert that into stream of bytes using a method known as JSON.stringify. And yeah, we'll pass the users object. And I guess that should do it. And yeah, after submitting we also need to reset our form as well, right? So what I'll do is I'll just say document dot forms of first dot reset. So it will actually reset my form, right? So yeah, something like this. Let's see if this works. I'm sure this should work, but I don't know. Let's try to enter something. Ashish and branches CSE. Sorry, I should reload this. And yeah, Kashyap at the gmail.com, CSE, hello world. And let's try to submit it. And we got an error. Document.get elements by id is not on function. Okay. uh, Line number 29, right? Script.js, document.get elements. We have element, right? Radio button is null. It's returning null, right? So do we have, no, sorry, it should be get elements. And by id, sorry, it should be name, right? We have defined name here. Yeah, it's a name. It shouldn't be id. I did a mistake here. And this should work right now. Yeah, we got the array back here. And yeah, this was all it. Actually we are running out of time, otherwise I would have shown you how to hero the page for records, where we could show all the records that we have stored in our local storage. And but it's pretty easy to do. All you have to do is you just need to call the local storage. And just like here we have written get local storage dot where it is, local storage dot set item, right? In that what you can write is local storage dot get item. to get all the like list, and the name given was my user list. So you could write my user list over there, and you will get the response back, and you need to parse that JSON response, right? Because we actually stored our data in the form of stream of bytes, and while returning we need to convert it back into our JSON format, right? So will you need to use something known as json.parse parse, and whatever the response is, you need to enclose inside that. And yeah, that would be it. You can try this and tell me if you have any bugs. You can maybe discuss and try to rectify that. So since we are running out of time, it's 8:12 already. I think I should know I think it's enough, and let's get back to the presentation. And next, congratulations for making it through the end of the presentation. And like I know it's not enough, and I haven't covered many of the great topics and intermediate topics, but since we have a time limit of 1 hour only, uh, I wasn't able to cover all of those. So but we have provided some of the beginner learning resources which are pretty good. Mdn, you might till this time you might have already known about Mdn Docs. I have said about this probably two to three times. And next we have Free Code Camp. This is a They have a YouTube channel as well, and they have a website where they have practice materials as well. So it's a pretty good resource. Next we have Code Academy and Odin project. Code Academy I haven't personally used, but there are some of my friends that say that it's pretty good. So you can try that. And we have Odin project as well. Odin project I have personally used, and it's a great resource. And they guide you from setting up your dev environment and even your operating system, to just guiding you and making sure that you create projects. And in Odin project has a great Discord community as well, so you can join their Discord server and create projects and get used to web dev, right? And for those who like to read books, these two books are like some of the industry standards that majorly many of the developers out there recommend to each other. First one is Eloquent JavaScript, and the second one is You Don't Know JS. I haven't read Eloquent JavaScript, but I have read You Don't Know JavaScript. It's written by a developer named Kyle Simpson, and he's a really great developer. And I think every person should at least once read this book. You Don't Know JavaScript, right? I have referenced all of these resources, and the PPT would be shared to you really soon, right? So thank you everyone, and it's Q&A time. And if you guys have any questions, you can ask me. You can unmute your mics and can ask me if you want anything. Nobody? Okay, cool. I guess that's it. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk.